B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, September 12th, 2018. The Trump White House is the new home of the Whopper. And I'm not talking about charbroiled burgers. Yes, Trump is on record now as one of the biggest liars in American history. And this is something we'll never truly recover from, because the resiliency of the public in trying to discern the truth from bullshit, well, it is declining because of the barrage coming from Trump. And the Washington Post is doing a national public service by keeping tabs on the bigly liar. Nearly 5,000 public comments by Trump have been proven to be false, misleading, or at minimum unsubstantiated. And when he goes on tour and stages these mob rallies with the Trump fans, he lies most of the time. The combined average on two Montana rallies, one in July and one on September 6th, that were detailed in the analysis by the Washington Post, the average is 72% of the time he is bullshitting. I mean, it is stunning when you see it laid out. And the fact checker, Glenn Kessler at the Washington Post, apologized for running down 88 comments that Trump made at that September 6th rally. And he said, it's a long list. We're grateful to any readers who make it all the way through. Well, I'm not one of them. The list went on, if I'd printed it all out, I think it was over 20 pages. And I stopped at page 6. And let's just look at the nature of the lies that he makes. It's pretty common stuff that we hear all the time. We have the best economy in history. Well, the response here, the president can certainly brag about the state of the economy, but he runs into trouble when he repeatedly makes a play for the history books. By about any important measure, the economy today is not doing as well as it did under Eisenhower, LBJ, or Bill Clinton, or for that matter, way back Ulysses S. Grant. Then he says the stock market is at record highs. Well, that is true. But it's worth noting that the percentage increase in the S&P index under Obama in his first 19 months as president was 62%, compared to about 25% for Trump. Now, Obama was recovering from the bottom that he was left by George W. Bush, so these are not apples compared to apples, in my opinion. But to simply claim a record high of the market really is misleading and lacks any real context. Then, of course, he claims unemployment is at historic lows. The current unemployment rate, 3.9%, is low but not historic. The unemployment rate was as low as 2.5% in 1953. That's the year of my birth. In fact, it was below 4% for much of 51, 52, and 53. And it was below 3.4% in 68, 69, and it was only 3.8% in 2000. So he routinely exaggerates, he fudges facts, he makes claims that simply are not true, and they're lapped up, apparently unskeptically, by most of the Trump mob members. Now, this is also leading to tension between whether people believe the president or the enemy of the people, the U.S. media. And for me, this is a difficult issue because Trump is truly not worthy of any kind of trust. But the corporate media in this country has lowered its standards and committed various forms of malpractice that I talk about on this podcast on a daily basis. And so the trustworthiness of the media is the lowest it has been in my lifetime. But a recent Quinnipiac poll shows that the number of Americans who trust Trump over the mainstream media has dropped 4 percentage points since the beginning of summer. Only 30% of people trust the president over the mainstream media. And when it comes to Republicans, 3 in 4 trust the president more than the news media. More than half of independents, a group that Trump won in 2016 and is kind of wobbly for him this year, 54% trust the media more than they do Trump. 27% of independents trust Trump over the media. And here is a claim that is widely made and often just accepted as fact because, well, it seems sensible, right? And this is the claim that the reason Trump had to separate families under his zero-tolerance policy is that these people who are caught and released into the United States never show up for their court hearings. Yeah, those are the kinds of claims you hear. Let's see, here's a quote. As they try to overturn the Flores settlement that restricts how immigrant children are treated while in custody. We've heard them tell us, like here's Tom Homan, the former director of ICE. In May, he told a congressional committee that many undocumented families who are released never make it to court. And even when they do, many more fail to comply with the lawfully issued removal orders from the immigration courts. Jeff Sessions has said that, not surprisingly, many of those who are released into the United States after their credible fear determination from the Department of Homeland Security simply disappear and never show up at their immigration hearings. And then a White House legislative director, Mark Short, told Wolf Blitzer, 80% of those coming here illegally never show up for court and are never deported. You know what the real number is? 86% of families released from immigration detention attended all of their court hearings, not just one, all of them. The percentage is over 90% when you limit it to families who have filed asylum applications. So that is a big lie. And Mark Short flipped the number. It's over 80% who go to court. He said it was 80% who don't. And so this effort by Trump, I think, is having an impact. And Americans are less likely to know what the truth is. They are more likely to embrace their own biases and the information, whether it's accurate or not, that they relied upon to develop those biases. Meanwhile, the zero-tolerance effort that sent these cruel images around the world of America separating children, including toddlers, from their parents at the border, well, it has not had the desired chilling effect. Because in August, the number of migrant family members arrested for illegally entering the U.S. jumped 38% as compared with a year ago in the same month. They apprehended 13,000 members of family units last month. Now, this is stunning. The other data point that surfaces is that the biggest pocket of the people who are showing up with children are coming from Guatemala. They make up an increasingly larger share of migrants who were apprehended or sought asylum. This year, about almost 43,000 Guatemalan migrants and families have been apprehended, and that is the largest share of any country of people who are moving to the United States. And so it shows that not only did the cruelty that was showcased by Sessions and Trump and Kirstjen Nielsen at Homeland Security, not only didn't it work, it appears to have telegraphed to people that the United States laws will not permit that kind of atrocious treatment of migrants, and it appears to have encouraged a new wave of people to test the resolve and the porousness of the southern border. And we're also learning as Hurricane Florence bears down on the Carolinas, threatening Virginia as well, that the Department of Homeland Security earlier this year transferred $10 million from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, diverting funds from the relief agency at the start of the hurricane season that began in June. Isn't that brilliant? And Jeff Merkley, the senator from Oregon, released a document that shows that the money would come from FEMA's operations and support budget. That money that would come from that was transferred into accounts at ICE to pay for detention and removal operations. A total of $200 million in Homeland Security funding was moved into budgets for ICE. That is a huge shift, and Congress didn't approve it. I'm not sure if it's all kosher. Now, a spokesperson for DHS says under no circumstances was any disaster relief funding transferred from FEMA to immigration enforcement efforts. But the Merkley documents show otherwise, and Merkley did this in response to a tweet from Trump where he claims we got A+ for our recent hurricane work in Texas and Florida and did an unappreciated great job in Puerto Rico, even though an inaccessible island with very poor electricity and a totally incompetent mayor of San Juan. We are ready for the big one that is coming. Now, Trump, of course, had to try to settle a score with the mayor of San Juan, who was quite articulate last year, and tried to avoid personally attacking Trump, but pointed out that the response was anemic at best and riddled with conflicts. You remember that company that got the no-bid contract to restore the electrical grid? And there are two guys from some place in Montana, Whitefish Junction or something. I mean, it was horrendous. And Trump is trying to rewrite history and give himself A+, and that's what caused Jeff Merkley to release that information. I saw a lot of great reaction to a post yesterday over at TomDispatch.com. And Andrew Bacevich is a retired Army colonel, also a retired history professor at Boston University, who, in my view, is one of the best informed and sharpest critics of American foreign policy. And he's written a piece which is kind of an unofficial midterm review of the Trump presidency. And I hope this isn't too offensive to you, but he refers to Trump as a pimple. He says, Trump himself is no more than a pimple on the face of this nation's history. It's time to step back from the mirror and examine the face in full. Pretty, it's not. And what he basically says in a 4 or 5 page essay is that the essential traits that define America today, those things that make the country so different from what it seemed to be in 1946, will surely survive the Trump presidency. And he offers a kind of balanced view here that despite all of the tweets and the noise that Trump has made, that he has really provided continuity of all America's military deployments around the world. He has, for whatever reasons, shifted his positions on Syria multiple times, and now it appears he is prepared to support regime change of Assad in Damascus. We don't know that for sure, but that appears to be part of the current thinking in this bizarre administration. Another quote here from Bacevich. The point of this informal midterm report card is not to argue that Trump has somehow failed. It is to rather highlight his essential irrelevance. Trump is not the disruptive force that anti-Trumpers accuse him of being. He's merely a noxious, venal, and ineffectual blowhard who has assembled a team of associates who are themselves, with few exceptions, noxious, venal, or ineffectual. And to complete the pimple metaphor, he says eventually a pimple dries up and disappears, often without leaving a trace. Such is the eventual destiny of Donald Trump as president. I've linked to Bacevich's commentary in the show file for today's podcast at peterbcollins.com. And yesterday I led the podcast with commentary about the 9/11 cover-up. Last night I joined hundreds of other people for the 9/11 Film Festival at Oakland's Grand Lake Theater. And it is fascinating to me to see the response you get. And I'll just call this guy Paul T, because that's his first name and his last name initial. And he sent me a scathing email. I couldn't listen to more than a few minutes of today's show. What a load of crap. All right. He then goes on to prove that he didn't listen to what I said, or if he did, he heard things that I didn't say. He said it's one thing to challenge U.S. authorities in their interpretation of facts, as I do, referring to himself. It is quite another to have alternative facts, such as when you question that planes hit the towers, which I have never questioned. What I said was that the planes that hit the towers could not have been responsible for causing towers 1 and 2 to crumble in their own footprints. He goes on, as when you question the planes that hit the towers or suggest that Building 7 or any other building fell for reasons other than the combination of fire, physical damage, and the ignorant, perhaps corrupt safety considerations practiced during construction. Now, Paul, you clearly are not willing to confront these issues in an intellectually honest way. You then refer to those who challenge the obviously flawed official narrative of 9/11, quote, in re-spewing the nonsense of charlatans that are in the 9/11 business only to make a buck. Well, let me tell you something. I was with 50 people at the 9/11 Film Festival last night, many of whom are video producers, independent media people who have done a lot of excellent work challenging the official narrative of 9/11. And not a one of them has made a buck of any significant amount on trying to fight for the truth. Then he says, you toy with the emotions of those affected and spit the graves of the dead. Well, I'm sorry, Paul. I cannot honor the dead with silence when their deaths may have been avoidable, when their deaths may have been caused by dark forces, either by people who allowed the 9/11 plot to go forward or people who actively enabled it. And I don't take a position publicly that it was an inside job or that I know who was actually responsible. What I know is that the official story does not hold up to close scrutiny. And so, Paul, I thank you for listening. I thank you for sending me this angry note. You are entitled to your view, but I'm not going to shut up. And I am not going to simply accept the consensus view because it is the consensus view. I have been a critic of government lies and cover-ups since the Nixon administration, and I'm not about to change my stripes, Paul. But again, I thank you for listening, and you are free to hold your opinions. And then I get 2 lines from John in Hawaii. He said, you're not crazy, but 9/11 drives me crazy. I have no idea how people can be so blind. Thanks for keeping up your efforts. Well, agree or disagree, every day I pause to thank people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And today I want to personally thank Andrew Rush, Stuart Russell, Gunnar Gunderson, and Brian Massey for their ongoing support of the Peter B. Collins Podcast. I invite you to join in. If you've got an extra $5 or $10 a month that you could direct my way, I'd be much obliged. Visit peterbcollins.com. Click on the menu tab. Click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. You got options, $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription. New annual subscribers with a continental address, a U.S. continental mailing address. That's what I try to say. You earn a bonus gift. The new CD from John Dist called American University. And if you don't like PayPal, I understand. Yo comprendo. I got it right this time, right, Hamish? You can address your correspondence and send checks or money orders. Cash is okay, too. To Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Well, the time's up. Me Too movement has claimed another. Jeff Fager, the longtime executive producer of CBS 60 Minutes, is being sacked by the network. He's leaving for violating company policy as he is being investigated for sexual misconduct. Now, they're saying that his departure isn't related to those allegations, but he violated company policy, and so he's being given the boot. Now, Fager says that he sent a text message to one of his staff members, a journalist, and he said, my language was harsh, and despite the fact that journalists receive harsh demands for fairness all the time, CBS did not like it. One such note should not result in termination after 36 years, but it did. So that's his side of the story, and I expect more heads to roll at CBS. There have long been rumors, particularly in the news division, of a very hostile work environment, and they certainly do grind their reporters, as this episode reveals. You may have heard of Julia Salazar, She's running for the state Senate in New York. The election, the primary is tomorrow. And she has had a kind of a sketchy path to this candidacy. She is a former pro-Israel. We would describe her as a Zionist, and she seems to have had some sort of a conversion. I don't know her whole story, but the reporting of her candidacy has included some kind of sketchy allegations about who she really is and what she stands for. Today, she presents as a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. She worked as an organizer of a group called Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. She supports BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanction program against Israel. And today, on Twitter, she said that she was confirming a sexual assault incident that occurred in 2013, and she accused the spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of being the man who assaulted her. His name is David Keyes. He's an American who has worked for the Israeli government. And Salazar wrote, before this story breaks, she said she had been advised that it was going to come out in the media. She said, I want to come forward and confirm I was a victim of sexual assault by David Keyes. There's a reason women don't often come forward after a traumatic experience because of the triggering and vicious responses that follow. And after she tweeted, a Wall Street Journal reporter named Shandy Race tweeted that she also had a terrible encounter with David Keyes before he joined Netanyahu's staff and claimed his mistreatment of women was an open secret. The man, quote, this is a quote, the man had absolutely no conception of the word no, according to Race. No matter how often I said no, he would not stop pushing himself on me. I was able to extricate myself quickly, and it was a very brief and uncomfortable moment. But I knew as I walked away, I had encountered a predator. So Keyes denies the allegations, and Salazar will be up for voters to decide if she gets elected to the state legislature, the state Senate, tomorrow. In other sex crime news and cover-up news, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, W-U-E-R-L, he spells his name, has asked for advice from the priests in his diocese, says he is going to Rome to confer with Pope Francis and to offer his resignation. Now, he is not admitting to any sex crimes himself, but he was the Archbishop of Pittsburgh, and of course the Pennsylvania grand jury report was blistering about the cover-up of Catholic priests who preyed on children. And he also is the successor, Wuerl is, to Cardinal McCarrick, Ted McCarrick, who recently stepped down after accusations that he molested an altar boy and coerced seminary students to sleep in his bed and have sex with him. And so I want to encourage Archbishop Wuerl to follow through and resign. And I think every American bishop should resign. I think that Cardinal Dolan of New York is the first who should be resigning. And yet I don't expect them to do so. They don't hold themselves to the same standards of morality and official behavior that they do many followers of the Catholic faith. And as a result of all this, Pope Francis, of course, he is under attack for claims that he knew about McCarrick long before he asked McCarrick to step down. And he is summoning all of the senior bishops around the world to come to the Vatican for a big meeting in February, the 21st to the 24th. And I don't know that this is going to solve the problem, but that is the way they have chosen to address it. You remember Joe Camel, the animated cartoon figure who was used by Camel Cigarettes to sell their death sticks to kids? Well, there's a new equivalent, and it's Joe Jewel. And Jewel in this case spelled J-W-L. That's J-U-U-L. And they sell the candy-flavored nicotine products that are inserted into e-cigarettes or vaping devices. And they're being accused of, peddling this stuff to children. And the leader of the FDA has given them 60 days to prove that they can keep their products away from minors. Scott Gottlieb, who now runs the FDA, he said that he believes that e-cigarettes and similar products like electronic nicotine delivery systems may be effective options for adults who want to quit smoking and still crave nicotine. But in announcing the agency's moves, he said regulators may have to curb the availability of the devices to everyone in order to keep them out of the hands of young people. He said, inevitably, what we're going to have to contemplate are actions that may narrow the off-ramp for adults who see e-cigarettes as a viable alternative to combustible tobacco in order to close the on-ramp for kids. It's an unfortunate trade-off, and I think that's an honest assessment. I've never used tobacco, so I have to freely admit my limited knowledge of this, but my friends who have been lifelong smokers have turned to vaping as a much more palatable alternative to get their nicotine fix. And this is stunning. Juul controls 72% of the market for nicotine hits, the inserts that you put in your vaping device, and it is valued by investors at $16 billion. And Big Tobacco is trying to catch up. There are 4 other companies facing the same 60-day deadline. R.J. Reynolds has a vapor company they call Vuse, V-U-S-E. Altria, the old Philip Morris, is marketing e-cigarettes under the name Mark 10. There's a company called Imperial Grand that sells Blue, B-L-U, and then there are vaping devices sold by a company called Logic. These are all players that I was completely unaware of. And speaking of predatory behavior toward children, a lawsuit reveals, this is by New Mexico's Attorney General, that the app for Android called Fun Kid Racing that is available in the family section of the Google Play Store, rated as age-appropriate for children? Well, it turns out that the app shares users' data, including the precise location of devices, with more than a half-dozen advertising and online tracking companies. And while adults don't have any real protection from online tracking and the use of that data, there is a children's federal privacy law that appears to be violated by this app. Now, the company says, look, this app can be used by adults too, and we only turn on the tracking for adults. Well, that's a questionable assertion, in my view. But the New York Times did a review of 20 children's apps, 10 on Android, 10 on the Apple iOS platform, and they found examples on both that sent data to tracking companies, potentially violating children's privacy laws. We'll see where that one goes. The mystery man, Joseph Mifsud, this professor who taught in Italy and, we're told, met with George Papadopoulos, tipped him off that Russia had dirt on Hillary Clinton, including emails. Well, Mifsud is still a mystery man. The last time he was seen publicly was last October, and he was a complete no-show for a trial of Joseph Mifsud in absentia that just concluded in Italy. And magistrates in Sicily have ordered him to pay about $57,000 after determining that his actions related to a university that he was running were corrupt or something like that. So it doesn't have a thing to do with Trump, with the Trump-Russia narrative, or with Papadopoulos. It's just the latest issue related to Mifsud. And after reading the breakdown that I shared with you last week, that really showed interesting connections between Christopher Steele's Orbis company in London, Stephen Halper, the U.S. diplomat and former political dirty trickster who was on the U.S. payroll and who interacted with Papadopoulos and appeared to be trying to help frame him, in my opinion. Well, there are connections that may or may not surface in a complete investigation of these issues. But I found it fascinating. I didn't get to watch Rachel Maddow's show last night, but I listened to it on my satellite radio in the car. And she continues to exaggerate the 14-day sentence of George Papadopoulos, making it seem like he's going away for life. and continues to ignore claims by Mifsud and Papadopoulos that they never talked about this stuff. Papadopoulos flatly says he has no recollection of telling the Australian ambassador that he knew that that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton. Now, do you believe Papadopoulos and Mifsud? That's a legitimate question. I don't know if they can be credible. But their commentary is dismissed because we have spooks who tell us what really happened. And you know, my baseline bias is I don't trust the spooks. And I'm sad to report that a man here in the Bay Area pulled out a knife. The guy is identified as a Trump hater by his own comments. His name is Farzad Fazeli, age 35. And over the weekend on Sunday, he went to the Castro Valley Fall Festival, where there was a booth of Republican candidates, including the guy who is challenging Democratic incumbent Eric Swalwell. And that candidate's name is Rudy Peters. And this guy, Fazeli, approached the booth where they were, made disparaging remarks about Republicans, started screaming, "Fuck Trump, fuck Trump." And then the man raised his middle finger, and there was some sort of a minor altercation. And the guy, Fazeli, started to walk away, and Peter says, the next thing you know, he stops and turns around, "I'll show you," and he runs at the booth. He said the man grabbed a coffee cup from the table, threw it at him. Then Peters came around the table to grab him, and at that point he pulled a switchblade out of his pocket and stabbed the Republican candidate. And I have to say that I do not in any way support violence of this nature. And it only plays into Trump's hands, helps to create the sense of victimization by his mob followers when you get a single case like this. So please, if you're a Trump hater, you feel like attacking a Republican, just don't, okay? Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. It's free and you're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it posted on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.